Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to start working on this new series. This is going to be quite an adventure, an experiment for me, and something that, I think hopefully you'll learn a lot from. Now, what are we calling this series? We're calling it Tech Startup from Scratch. So this is really about building an app, really a whole platform from start to finish. I haven't written any code yet. We've planned some stuff you'll see in a bit, but we're going to start, and this is going to be a really long series. I'm going to try and keep the videos very compartmentalized, aiming for 30 to 40 minutes per each one, and going to label them really well so that, if you aren't someone who has the time to go through everything from start to finish, you can pick up the pieces that are most interesting and relevant to you. So let's talk about the approach. We're going to build a full stack app from scratch. So front end and back end, and essentially the API that bridges them together, as well as go through everything from setting up push notifications, potentially setting up things like subscriptions, as well as getting it into the app stores, getting the server deployed to a production environment, even probably building a landing site for this thing outside of the actual product itself, and a bunch of other things. I've made the scope fairly large, but it's manageable. It's not crazy. There's not a lot of like super like hardcore technical challenges. It's a lot of common things that you'll be building in a normal app platform. Like I said a moment ago, I'm going to try and label each of the videos with the topics covered, and I'm aiming for 30 to 40 minutes. Some might be longer, some might be shorter, but we'll just kind of have to take it as we go. And this idea was inspired by one of my subscribers recently. It's always been something I've kind of wanted to do, but I always thought it was crazy. But I'm ready now. So let's talk about what's different from maybe my other content. So normally I put in a lot of prep, right? When I'm doing a tutorial, I'll build the whole thing first, just off camera, and kind of figure it out, and then have it up on another screen and use it as a reference. And that's just so I'm not wasting people's time, and I'm not doing something the wrong way and being like, oh, forget everything I just said, because that happens a lot in software dev. And that's fine. I think it's a good way to do things. But obviously, for something this large, and you'll see the scope in a moment, that is not really possible for me with my other commitments. I can't just build this whole thing and then go through it again. I also want to mention, something I've noticed in that original approach in my other content is sometimes I see myself rebuilding it in like a different order than I did before, because I'm not really like, when you're building it kind of from scratch, when you're thinking it out, you're going to do it in a really like logical order. And sometimes I find myself going, oh, like I'm just kind of like, normally I'm going between like this file to this file, this file, this file. Then maybe when I'm building it on the tutorial, it's a little more like this file, then this file. And I think actually doing this might be a really cool way to see, maybe at least my approach and what I think is a good approach in sort of building stuff. So I think there's a pro to doing it this way. So what are we going to build? So I've always wanted to make an app or a platform for finding open mic events. So open mics are like, for amateur musicians, comedians, even like poetry, writers, whatever. A lot of the time they happen at like bars, restaurants, and you just kind of go at the start of maybe it starts at like 7 p.m. and you show up and you get your name on the list and you get to go up and play 3 songs or whatever, it is. And I find that, at least in Canada, where I'm from, although I've done some research on this too, it's hard to find these things without actually, going to a bar first and seeing a sign that says like, oh, there's this thing on Tuesdays, cool, I'm gonna go. Or, getting into the scene and making friends with people and, all that kind of stuff and finding out where they are. I found out in nearby, in the suburb area nearby, there's like an open mic every night at different places, but there's not a site I can go to and be like, oh, what night can I go to this? What night? I have to kind of like figure it out. So that's kind of like what we're trying to do here. Like I said, there's currently some basic websites that do something like this. They're very out of date. They don't really have that community that I think could be really interesting. The tech is, really like old school, and it doesn't really have that polish that I have in mind. I also want to take it a step further and integrate like social elements. So the idea of people having like profiles and posts and, engagement, commenting, all that kind of stuff to really like make it a place that could be a community as well. And I am someone that actually participates in these kinds of things when I can. I really enjoy it. So I'm passionate about it and knowledgeable. I know how they kind of work and where, I think technology and community could come in to make it even better. If this thing actually, proves to be somewhat successful, or at least like, people are using it and it's cool and people like it, I do sort of have a plan that this could actually evolve into just not just open mics, but really like any amateur musician comedy sort of things, shows, not like big shows at big arenas, but like little things that happen in the back of bars and stuff like that. Just a place to be able to post about those and get more people coming. And potentially business model wise, having a if you go to those kind of shows, sometimes they pass a hat around and they're like, put money in it, and I feel like that's harder to do these days because everyone just has debit. So having a way to like sort of have these on here and let people do like a pay what you can kind of thing within it when they go to the shows, just scan this QR code and pay, cool, and the musicians can make more money. Like that's a win, I think. And that's, potentially a place where we could take a 3% transaction fee or something like that to, sort of service this sort of thing. Other ideas too for business model, but that's one that, I think is pretty obvious if this thing gets to that point. Let's talk about what I've done to prep for this. So I've jotted some ideas in my notebook, as I usually do. I've created a software map, like kind of like a feature list of what I think this thing should have for its minimum viable product, its MVP. I've also updated a bit of my hardware and software environment just to make sure that I can pump these out better. And so I essentially have another computer, my PC, that my video card is going through that's just recording what we're seeing right now. And that way I'm not wasting processing power on this, and it'll allow me to kind of do things in parallel. While I'm recording the next one, I could be rendering out the other one. I'm just trying to do things not to make this like a huge hassle and to get the content out quicker. And I have been, helping start startups since about 2009. I've worked with many companies as a developer or as a freelancer and to help people, take their ideas to the market. And I've had much success with this on mostly on other people's projects, but I have a few startups that like tech startups that are, doing all right these days. And so I know what I'm doing, not just from a technical point of view, but also from, a strategic point of view. Let's talk about the technology we're going to use here. So we're going to be using Flutter on the front end. If you're, familiar with my content, I think that's a pretty obvious guess. And we're intending to do this as an iOS app, an Android app, and actually a web app on both desktop and mobile for web. And we're going to use Serverpod on the back end. I love Serverpod. I think it's an awesome project, and there's two reasons I think it makes sense to use here. Yeah, it's awesome, and it is, in my opinion, the best way to get a Flutter-based MVP to market with the least lines of code, because there's a lot that it does for you that kind of bridges the gaps, which if you're not familiar with Serverpod, you'll definitely see why I'm saying that. And I want to stick with just one programming language. We can use Dart on the front end and Dart on the back end because, if we're trying to pick up and learn some stuff, like let's try and keep, the things we need to learn a little bit more focused. In the real world, although I've used Serverpod on some semi-production things and a lot in just like R&D, I generally do go with Django for my backends. But this is, I think, a perfect project to use Serverpod for and for the reasons mentioned. Our core packages, there'll be many more, or at least a few more. We do a lot of custom stuff. But we're going to be using Dio for networking, FP-Dart for functional programming. We're going to use Riverpod for state management, GoRouter for routing, and Sembast for local storage. At least that's the plan. We're kind of figuring it as we go. So we might realize, oh, Sembast isn't going to work for this reason. We're going to go to Hive or something. But that's kind of the plan. And to all those Riverpod haters out there, don't give up on this just yet. There's plenty of great non-state management stuff to unbox in here. I 100% think if you love Block and you'll never want to touch Riverpod, there's still gonna be a lot of value you get out of this. So don't just walk away now and and say, oh no, this isn't interesting. Because really, state management, although it's a big part of the application, this topic, I've picked something that specifically has a lot of different pieces that aren't even relevant, whether you use Block or June or just whatever. We're also not going to be using any full-blown clean architecture because honestly, in my opinion, it's overkill for trying to get an MVP to market. It's definitely good for enterprise. It's definitely good for big projects with many developers. But for a solo dev, although, I'm trying to treat this kind of as a group collaboration project, at least in some ways, um, it really doesn't make sense to do that. Now, if you've been following some of my stuff, I am using clean architecture in a couple projects, and that's because, especially the one project I'm doing, Houston, it is supporting multiple backends at its core, and clean architecture is perfect for that because you can just swap out something like Django and put in something like Supabase or Serverpod or any of that kind of stuff. All right, but we will be clean and we will follow solid principles. It's going to still be nice, even though we're not going to have like this data domain and presentation layer. But they will be organized, and you'll see. And I think you'll like it. And it's an approach I've used. It'll be a modified approach I've used on many projects that are in production. So it's not. It's definitely going to work. Okay, let's talk about the scope of this app. All right, so I FigJam something. If you're not familiar with FigJam, it is created by the people that made Figma. It's kind of a separate product built within Figma, and it's really awesome because it's kind of like Figma, but not meant for like doing UI designs, and more for like brainstorming and flowcharts and notes and stuff like that. And I really enjoy it. Um, so, um, what are we doing here? Well, this is the open mic app. I'm going to walk you through sort of the scope and what I have in mind for it. Of course, things will change. We will come up with other ideas. We will decide this idea doesn't really meet our MVP goal and it's too much, work. Let's skip it for now and keep it in mind for later. But I guess just starting at the start, we have the app launching. Okay, you launch the app. And by the app, when we say the word app, I'm talking about the iOS app, the Android app, or even the web app. So first we're going to check, because this is going to be a public facing app. You don't need an account to view stuff. You need an account to like interact, but you don't need it to just like view. So I'm not going to bring people to like a login page right away. That's always, I think a big no-no when, for something like this, especially when it's web-based, because you want people just coming to it and being able to start, learning and whatever. Now, we're going to check, of course, if they are signed in, like they already have an auth token and hasn't expired, like, we're just going to bring them right to over here to the feed. Or in the case that they've come before and we've stored something in local storage that, tells us a little bit about them, we bring them right to the feed page, essentially. At least that's probably the plan, feed being, the main page. But basically everything within here, I'm calling the dashboard. This is like where you're interacting with the app. You can think of this very much if it's a mobile app, like these are the 5 tabs of our, of our app here. So if you are coming for the first time though, or at least first time on a new device and you haven't signed in and stuff, we are going to ask a couple questions because my plan for this is rather than launching this as like a worldwide global app, we're going to focus on launching it in one area. It's going to be Toronto, Canada, as sort of like where if there's marketing or whatever, that's where it would go. But basically where the attention will be to get people to use it. Because I find these kind of apps, whether it's anything location based, real world, like it's really hard to just like get it out and everything's going to be really spread out. And we want like a core good user group in one place. So we're going to be asking people or getting them to choose their location and basically like say they're near Toronto. It's like, okay, they're in the Toronto hub and everything is going to be related to that, geographic area. They might be in a different one. And, my plan would be maybe like LA and New York would be the next places. And there could be like a thing to like request and you can still, view the content of whatever hub we launch with, but we want to get that data. Anyways, long story short, we have a feed screen. That's actually the feeds, that's like your social feed and it's really anything to do with things in your hub. So venues that are posting about different events or even other people posting about their performance or whatever. So this is our feed. You can think of it as an Instagram feed. It's going to have an image probably. Eventually we might have video, all that kind of stuff. Explore, this is all about venues. So venues like kind of one of our core models and that is the restaurant or the bar or whatever, the location itself. And we're going to see it in just a list view, but we're also going to have a map view for it. In the list, I've kind of planned out what would be in like the venue card, like the thing you see before you go to the detail page. We see the name of it, all that kind of stuff. There's a detail screen where you get a bit more info and all that kind of stuff. Create. So create is going to be dependent on whether you are a manager of a venue or a manager of an event, because that will allow you to create a new event if you already have a venue. So you see that there, like creating an event. Anyone can create posts and they can attach it to, a particular event or venue. Also, there'll be a smaller CTA just to add a venue and so on and so forth, et cetera, et cetera. You get it. This tab, events or schedule or whatever we're going to call it, this will have all of our events that are upcoming. And we can prioritize and have like a segmented controller for ones that are events that you maybe manage versus ones that you've like bookmarked or liked, or ones that are upcoming, past ones, whatever. We'll figure out all the nitty gritty, but that's what this one's gonna be for. And then profile. This is managing your own profile, all the basic stuff like your bio and image and your post list and whatever. What venues you're following, users you're following, settings, all that kind of stuff. So that's the scope. Again, some stuff will change. We always do some stuff for auth, but it's just the basic, the standard sort of stuff that you'd expect, like login and register, be able to toggle between them. We're going to do, Google and Apple and just a regular email as your different methods of going in. And we'll have a little bit of onboarding when you create your account to get, what hub they're in and what your interests are. You might only be interested in open mics that are music versus comedy and, that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's kind of the scope in a nutshell. Let's go back to the presentation. So this to me, for what we're building, is enough to get started. In a normal situation, I'm building something for a client. A lot of the time we go through like wireframing and even like UI design, all that stuff before we code. However, we're going to do a lot of our design in code because why not? And we don't really have to worry about, like, a good reason to do wireframes, in my opinion, is to really lock the feature spec and get that green sign off. Yes, I'm good to go. Like, client's good. Let's move on. Cool. The biggest problem in software development in, working with clients is feature creeping, right? And if you don't give them that clear picture of exactly what it is, and more importantly, what it is not, like, they'll start being like, oh, you should add this feature. Oh, you should add this feature. And that's how you kill a project. We don't have to worry about feature creeping because we can do whatever the heck we want. I'm conscious about feature creeping. And if an idea, subscriber suggests this cool idea, and if it's like, oh, that's actually not a ton of work and makes this awesome, like, yeah, we'll do it. If that's a great idea, but it's gonna like make this thing way too long, it could become something post MVP. Also, if things go well later in this project, I'm going to get a UI designer to kind of come in and just like, based on our like kind of like material sort of design and my little bit of a design eye, we'll get them to come in and tweak some stuff, make it pretty, do like a bit of a reskin and stuff like that. But I am all for like not letting the designer design it. We know what we're building. We want to make this thing. We're going to build it, and then we can make it a little bit prettier later. Things we will learn. All right, we have a brief list of things that I expect you will learn if you stick through this. So let's go back to here. All right, things we will learn. There's a lot and probably more, but from the backend point of view, obviously we're gonna have stuff with databases, CRUD, create, read, update, and delete. Authentication, we're going to be building a lot of custom API endpoints. We're going to have logging and caching, delayed tasks, user permissions, file uploads. We're going to do some stuff with sockets because Serverpod has a really awesome solution for web sockets. We're going to do push notifications. We're going to get into actually deploying the server. We're going to have some transactional emails like for password resets and welcome emails and that kind of stuff. And we might, in this version, have something with payments and subscriptions. We might not, but that will definitely come if this thing, works. On the front end, like I said, we're going to not use clean architecture, but we're going to have still solid architecture. We're going to have our CRUD. We're going to be doing stuff like data caching and validation when things change. We're going to have uploading files. We're going to have stuff for responsive UI, sockets, like I mentioned over here, local storage, iOS, Android, and web, maps, which I think is cool because there's going to be a map view of this that shows all the venues. So we can look into that and maybe even do some clustering of pins and fun stuff like that. Routing, deep linking, internationalization, and I'm excited when we get to this. I do want to build this with internationalization in mind. It's easier to do it at the start than do it later, even if you only launch in one language. But I'm excited because I have a really cool tool that I've built that will be something that my like channel members will get access to that makes doing internationalization like way easier. Unit testing. And even though it's like a solo project, like, yeah, we should probably do some unit testing. We'll it's at the bottom of the list, but we'll get there. And then we're probably gonna have audio playback. I don't think we're gonna have video day one, but I think it makes sense to allow people to upload audio because this is about doing, it's a microphone, like open mics. We should have like not just photos, but like people's whatever songs or comedy routines if they choose to. Outside of backend and front end, there's a lot of stuff I think that is worth noting that we'll be going through, like configuring our server, configuring like web hosting, App Store configuration for Google Play and iOS. Push notification config, that's always complicated. I've done it a lot of times though, so I think I can help. We might build a landing site, which I know we've talked about tech being Flutter. The landing site won't be Flutter. It'll probably, might be Next.js. It'll probably be Astro though. I'm really liking Astro these days for something like that. We'll be doing stuff with SEO and analytics, continuous integration and continuous deployment. We'll be setting up like an SMTP API server so that we can send emails in a nice way and not get them to go into junk. We're gonna be setting up like Sentry, which is for like logging and errors, and potentially, yeah, payment gateway setup on Stripe, iOS, and Android, depending on what approach we go for the payments. Awesome. Some stuff on, yeah, we talked about the tech, so I'm not going to list that out right now, but some other stuff that I think is worth mentioning is kind of like some of the workflow stuff that we're going to be using. We're going to be using Docker for local development. There's a lot of stuff that's going to be code generated, especially with using Serverpod. We're going to be using like Git, obviously, GitHub Actions. We may be using some GPTs at time. I tend to use ChatGPT, just to ask simple questions like how do I do this stupid thing in Dart that I've done a million times. I just find it's faster than going to Stack Overflow these days. VS Code will be our code editor. We're going to be using environment files for managing our different flavors of our app and our different, staging environment, production environment, local environment. We're likely going to be hosting this on AWS when we get there. And the web, we're going to host on something called DashHost, which is a project I've been working on the side that's like a Flutter web. It's kind of like Code Magic just for Flutter web and has a really cool bonus feature that is perfect for this app. And we'll talk about that at another time. If you are interested in that, I have some content about it. Cool. And in terms of the order of operations here, because we have a lot to do, this is kind of what I have in mind. This will probably change. But obviously, we're going to set up the project right after this. We're going to get our basic auth working at first, which is just like the email and password-based auth. We're going to get our custom user out of the way because we want to be able to have a user that has things that the built-in user doesn't have. We're going to get our core models made, which to me is venue, event, post, and comment. I also have this idea of event template, which we'll talk about at some point when it's relevant. Venues, event, like then we're going to flush out like everything with venues, events, and posts, and that's all the CRUD for it and displaying them and all that kind of stuff. We're going to deal with media, uploading files, comments, all the interactions you can do, liking, bookmarking, following, all the stuff for managing your user profile. We'll eventually do the map that I talked about. That'll be fun. Push notifications, error logging, analytics, service deployment, web hosting with DashHost. Then we have 10% of the remaining tasks left, and that's going to be 90% of the work, which is a kind of a joke in software development and in, I think, building any kind of project. But it's kind of true. You're like, okay, we're almost there, and then you have like so much more that you forget about. Then we have this mystery phase, and then profit. Let's hope. All right, back to my presentation. So we just looked at that list. Prerequisites for this course. It is a beginner-friendly course. If you want to call it that, course series, I don't know. What do you want to call it? Optionally, like if you have familiarity with Flutter and Dart, or you at least have experience like working on apps on both the front end and back end in any tech stack, I think this is going to be really good for you. But again, that's optional. Required though, like you need to have a passion to learn and to take what you've learned and try making stuff yourself. Don't get stuck in tutorial hell. Just do your thing. You'll learn. Don't think of the project like, I know we looked at that, it was probably pretty overwhelming. But even broken down that way, it's like, okay, it's just one little thing at a time, right? It's like, okay, how do we do a map? I don't need to know now. I'll figure it out. I do know now. I do know now. I've done many projects with maps, but you don't need to know every little thing. You don't have to know the whole big picture. Just break it into steps and make it yourself. I will say that I'm not going to be teaching the fundamentals of Flutter and Dart, but I'm going to consciously be explaining, everything that I'm doing as best as I can. But I also don't want to like bore experienced devs who might be watching this. So I'm trying to find that happy balance of like, okay, like this content's applicable to this pretty good range, but I don't want to dumb it down so much and be like, all right, this is how you install Flutter. Like, we're not going to do that. We're going to assume you already know how to install Flutter, and if not, Google it. Therefore, like throughout, if there is something that you're confused about, ask in the comments, review the docs, or like consult your favorite GPT. Some final things I want to mention. So I'm building this product in the open, but the source code will not be public on GitHub, at least while I'm making it. And that's because I now have a YouTube channel that, or a membership thing in YouTube. I became a YouTube partner now. It's awesome. And that's one of the perks I'm going to be giving people who are subscribing to me on the as an actual member, the access to the GitHub repository, as well as other things. I have a lot of other cool perks in there. We're going to have a Discord, and we're going to do mentoring and all this fun stuff. You can check it out. So I am keeping that hidden for now. Of course, if you're watching along, you're going to see all the code. You could, in theory, type it. I'm not trying to be secretive, but I just want to have something that for these members who are supporting the channel. I do think I will be open source after this is all wrapped. So if you're watching this in the future, hi, and it's possibly open source now, and I don't have a problem with that. This is a product that, as much as it's, hopefully if it's successful, it's still going to be like a business. But to me, there's nothing, at least at this point, there's nothing like proprietary. There's not like some crazy algorithm that we need to hide from the masses. Like, this is all traditional basic stuff. And I'm doing this at least 70% for the teaching purposes and 30% for like, oh, maybe this thing would be like a cool app to exist. So it will, probably be eventually completely open source. That's what I'm going to say about that for now. I'm also going to be live streaming the build on most Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays on Twitch, looking like 10 a.m. EST time. And that's because I'm pretty much doing this live anyways. However, on YouTube, I'm going to take all the things I'm recording on when I'm doing the Twitch stream, like I'm doing right now, and I'm going to slightly trim it down, clean it up, do some audio processing, all that kind of stuff, and post it to YouTube. So I'm going to try and do that as quick as possible, like hopefully record something and it'll be up later that day or early the next. But I welcome you to come to the streams on Twitch. It's just twitch.com/TylerSavery. And you can then participate too. Like, we have, chat there and all that kind of stuff. So just keep that in mind. I will be doing it that way for the most part. There might be times where I just can't do the live stream for whatever reason, and I just want to keep the content going, and I'll just get a video. But that's basically what we're trying to do. And as we build, I want you to leave your comments, come out and hang, like I said, in the live streams, and participate. I'm going to be looking for input from you guys. For instance, I've given this some thought, but I don't have an answer yet. Like, what are we going to call this app? That's something, like we could maybe come up with together, as well as ideas, like what would work better. Maybe there's some people who are in the music scene too and can have a perspective on this that we can do. So I want to make this, as like collaborative as possible, at least from like a discussion point of view and idea point of view. But let's just see, what happens. Why am I doing this? Good question. So I find most courses, they focus on, the foundational knowledge, but they don't go into like the full process. And that's what, I'm trying to do here is show something from start to finish. I also want to expand my audience, and I want to attract people that are passionate about making their ideas a reality. So I'm not just trying to get Flutter devs here to be like, I'm going to upgame my skill. I also want like people, because I see this on the subreddits and stuff all the time, people who are like, I'm starting to learn Flutter because I want to make this idea. And that's really like a big core target for this, is the people that don't necessarily know how to even code, but they're starting to learn, they're picking it up. And I think this is hopefully going to be like a really good source for those types of people. And I want to make this app anyways. Like, I think this is a cool app. I would use this app. I'm going to use this app and whatnot. And yeah, I just think seeing the process like end to end, like literally we haven't written any code yet, to getting this into the app stores and deployed to a server and all that kind of stuff. Like I think it'll be a pretty cool piece of hopefully internet history. So let's get to it. I'm ready. I hope you're ready. Let's get down to work.